The Global Hawk can fly above 60,000 feet. It could fly from Ohio to the Pentagon above commercial airplanes' flight paths. Since it is small and more than 50% carbon fiber, it is not as noticeable on radar as commercial airplanes, especially when flying at 60,000 feet. This would explain why the air traffic controllers never noticed it on their radar as it traveled to the Pentagon. Or maybe it took off from another field close by? A Global Hawk also flies at 400 miles per hour, which is the speed the military claims Flight 77 was flying when it allegedly hit the Pentagon. Seismic sensors are buried around the world for measuring earthquakes and other events. These devices are so sensitive that many of them picked up the impact vibrations of the airplanes as they crashed into the World Trade Center and the crash in Pennsylvania. They also picked up the collapse of the towers and the collapse of Building 7. What was so different about the Pentagon crash that seismic sensors did not record vibrations from an airplane crashing into the Pentagon? Scientists who analyzed the data reported, "Despite detailed analysis of the data, we could not find a clear seismic signal." A seismic station near the Pentagon does not show any clear sign of an airplane crash. A different station shows a blip that might be an airplane crash at 9:39, and a third station shows absolutely nothing. The blip in the middle graph, which is colored red to make it more visible, appears to be a possible airplane crash. But the scientists who analyzed the data claimed that it occurred at too high a frequency. If it was not an airplane crash, what was it? Another ongoing operation? 6 Global Hawks were built as of December 2002. If one of them crashed into the Pentagon, there should be one less in the inventory. Reporter Christopher Bolin spoke with the Air Force in December 2002, and they admitted that 2 Global Hawks were lost in ongoing operations. Not surprisingly, the Air Force refused to explain what those ongoing operations meant. As previously mentioned, Flight 77 vanished from air traffic controllers' radar screens near Ohio. Nearly an hour later, it was noticed on radar near Washington, D.C. It was dropping from a high altitude. CBS News describes it as a downward spiral, turning almost a complete circle. How do we explain the sudden appearance on radar of Flight 77? Could it have been one of those missing Global Hawks or a similar drone aircraft and not Flight 77? If a Global Hawk flew from Ohio to the Pentagon above 60,000 feet, it would not be easy to see on radar until it descended to below 10,000 feet. Flight 77 allegedly dropped a treetop level and headed toward the Pentagon. But where are the witnesses who heard the tremendous roar of its jet engines? The lack of noise suggests that this was not Flight 77 at all, but instead one of those missing Global Hawks, which are very quiet. As the Global Hawk crossed into Pentagon property, a missile may have been fired at it. Does the Pentagon have missiles in its security system? The missile would have shattered the Global Hawk and incinerated its carbon fiber. But just in case small pieces survived, people would have to check for scraps. The fuselage of a drone has an aluminum frame, so if a large piece of it survived, it would also have to be concealed. While a Global Hawk and a missile can explain what happened at the Pentagon, where are the passengers and crew of Flight 77? Before trying to answer that question, consider that the bodies of the Pentagon employees who died in the attack were shipped to a morgue in Virginia, and then we were told they were shipped to a morgue in Dover, Delaware, which undertook the final autopsies. Why the shuffling of dead bodies? Next, consider that dental records, DNA analysis, and other methods were used at Dover, Delaware to identify the body parts, and the investigators claim to have identified body parts of the passengers of Flight 77. If Flight 77 landed near Ohio, the passengers' bodies could then have been shipped to the morgue in Dover, Delaware, at the same time the dead Pentagon employees were also being shipped to Dover. The people in Dover would never realize that the bodies were coming from different locations. Building number 7 at the World Trade Center was a 47-story building with a steel frame. No airplane crashed into it, nor did the towers fall onto it. However, this building disintegrated on September 11th. This satellite image shows the World Trade Center about a year before the attack. Building 7 is the tall building at the top. Building number 1 is the North Tower. You can distinguish it from the South Tower by its antenna. Buildings 4, 5, and 6 were office buildings. Building 3 was a hotel. The attack on September 11th destroyed all 7 of these buildings, and it damaged surrounding buildings as well. Here is a view from an airplane of the rubble of Building 7. The pile is very small. How did a 47-story steel building crumble into such a tiny pile of rubble? The Bush administration wants us to believe that fire caused it to disintegrate. Fires started in Building 7 at around 9 o'clock in the morning, a few moments after the plane crashed into the South Tower. These fires burned slowly all day. This photo shows the fires at 3 p.m. The fires are not easy to see because they are small, and the air is full of dust and smoke. Nearby buildings and reflections make it difficult to figure out where Building 7 is, so I'll fade out the other buildings for a moment so that you can see Building 7 more clearly. There are flames coming from only a few of the thousands of windows of this large building. Most floors do not have fires, and those that do are burning in a few small areas only. Compared to other office fires, these are small. Why didn't the sprinkler system extinguish them? This photograph shows the rear of Building 7. This side of the building doesn't have many fires either. There are no fires anywhere along the base of the building. Incidentally, in the background of this photograph are buildings number 5 on the left and 6 on the right. Both of those buildings have very serious fires burning inside. The government has never bothered to explain how Building 5 ended up with such serious fires. Despite the fact that the fires in Building 7 were so small that the sprinkler system should have extinguished them, at about 5:30 in the evening, the building suddenly imploded and crumbled into a pile of rubble. How did a few small fires cause Building 7 to collapse? According to Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering, a magazine for fire departments, fire has never destroyed a steel building. So how did a fire do what it had never done before? Perhaps you wonder if incompetent architects designed this building with delicate steel beams. If so, take a look at the beam with numeral 7 spray-painted on its end. To say the beams in Building 7 were massive would be an understatement. This building was straddling an electrical substation for the city, so it had some of the thickest steel beams of any building ever built on the planet. At the upper left corner is a standard I-shaped beam. It would be considered massive in most buildings, but it seems delicate next to the biggest beams of Building 7. As is typical in the design of buildings, bridges, and most industrial products, Building 7 was designed with more strength than it actually needed. So how did a building with such a massive steel framework disintegrate into such a small pile of rubble from a few fires? The Bush administration assigned the Federal Emergency Management Agency to conduct an investigation into why the buildings in the World Trade Center collapsed. However, the editor of Fire Engineering magazine became so disgusted by the investigation that the January 2002 issue published an article in which he called the investigation a half-baked farce. Later that month, both Bush and Cheney asked Tom Daschle to limit the investigation. Apparently, a half-baked farce was more of an investigation than Bush and Cheney dared. In March 2002, the Committee on Science of the House of Representatives held a meeting to investigate the investigation. There were more insults and accusations flying around at this meeting. For example, Congressman Boehlert complained that the investigation seems shrouded in excessive secrecy. Professor Corbett complained that they were trying to run an investigation with part-time engineers and scientists and on a shoestring budget. There were also accusations that landlords and insurance companies interfered with the investigation. It seems that a lot of people were helping President Bush hijack the investigation. During April 2002, the final pieces of rubble from the World Trade Center were removed. The heavy steel beams were sold to China and other